So, I made up a calendar, one that God has given me visions about and shown me. And I want to walk through this simple day count with you like I was showing you a while ago. Here is Christmas time on this calendar here. And if you count back the 40 days you come to tabernacles, well, which will become God's tabernacles. I'll show you that in a minute. So from Hanukkah back 40 days, then we count up the 5 days. That would become our atonement. And 10 days from that would become Feast of Trumpets. There's your Halloween right there. If we keep numbering our days back through the months, we come all the way over here to Passover, we land on what? May the 14th or 15th. Now, what do we know about that date? We know that the Jews announced the nation of Israel on May the 14th and 15th of 1948. All throughout the Bible, we see a pattern where God takes his people back to the promised land on Passover. Time and time and time again. It is symbolic that his people go back on Passover so they can remember the Exodus, remember the covenant, and why he took them there in the first place. Okay? This makes perfect sense. Now, what God has done is shown me his day counts and then told me to take the Jewish calendar and overlay it with his calendar. See that? God's month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you'll see the Jewish calendar days. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishri, Heshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shevet, Adar. Okay? And so what you can see here is that when we get to the 7th month, which God would call, what the Jews would call Tishri, what you're going to see here is that the Jewish calendar is actually a month off from God's. So when looking at our day counts and our timeline for the raptures, we have those day counts from Daniel 1260, 1290, 1335. At the second coming, this 1335 will end at this Hanukkah down here on the bottom, as you see right here in the second half. But in the first half, because we are counting 1, 2, 3, and 3 plus another half a year, so that 3.5 years will actually take you to the Day of Atonement, starting the year before the raptures begin. Okay? So we have 1260 at God's true Hanukkah, 1290 at the Jewish Hanukkah, which is Christmas time, and then up to 1335 at the Day of Atonement. Let me show you this on the calendar. It comes back to 1260, 1290, 1335, the Day of Atonement, when God will make his decision as to whether or not he's going to start the tribulation period on any given Shemitah cycle. And I'll teach you about those later. So let's run through the book of Revelation and let's put together everything we have learned so far. We know that the timeline goes from Passover to Hanukkah. You see the cross in the middle? From Passover to Hanukkah. Okay, and we know that Hanukkah takes us full circle from beginning to end. Remember I told you about the 7-day wedding feast and then the 8th great day celebration. So the timeline is going to end up covering an 8-year time span, but the tribulation itself will only be for 7 years and the raptures will only take place in a 7-year time frame. Aside from all the symbolism, when you read the book of Revelation, if you don't know what you're looking at, it's not going to make any sense. Okay? Trying to put this book in order without understanding that this is written like birth pains, where everything gets stronger and stronger and stronger, is just going to be futile. Okay? So you have to understand that our timeline is for 7 years. We have the 4, 2, and 1. You have to understand there are 4 sets of judgments. I'm sorry, y'all. I should have put that line right here with the trumpets. And I should have put this line with the thunders. And I should have put this line right here with the vials. I apologize. Sorry. Okay. When you read the book of Revelation, what you're going to see is you're going to see John explaining each one of the judgments, except for the thunders. We don't know what those are. But if you go back through the scriptures, which I have done in recent years, and you see every time where God's voice is mentioned, like the sound of thunder, you can get a pretty good idea of what these thunder judgments are going to be. And unfortunately, one of those judgments is going to be nuclear war. Now, these judgments will be popping off one on each feast day for that given year. So this would be like Judgment Year 1, Judgment Year 4, 6, and 7. But even though they're popping off or being opened at the first year for the seals will last all the way to the end of the tribulation period. So, even though the Antichrist is allowed to come on the scene here, the Antichrist will still be here throughout the entire 7 years. When you get down to the last seal judgment, you see Jesus ruling and reigning. Well, that doesn't happen till the second coming. So even though the seal judgment has been given or opened, it will not come to fruition until the end of the 7 years. All right? Same thing with the trumpets. The trumpets are blowing here. But Jesus returns at the last trump right here. So we know that even though the trumpets are blowing, the trumpets are lasting all throughout the tribulation period. Okay? Same thing with the thunders. They'll start here, but they'll finish here. These will start right here at the end and finish at the end. Now, it's important you understand that, because when you read the book of Revelation, what you're going to see is John's going to talk about the 7 seals. But then, when you get to the trumpets, he might go back and mention 1 or 2 of the seals. Like he might mention seal 1 and seal 5 before he tells you the 7 trumpets. Or he might talk about seal 1 and seal 5 within the 7 trumpets. So you're going to see some of the same events taking place during the trumpet judgments that are happening back over here in the seals. Okay? Same thing with the thunder, excuse me. Even though John does not specifically spell out the thunder judgments, he does mention, like possibly, and I'm just making this up, y'all. I'm not giving you specific examples. Maybe I'll give you an example here in a minute. But he might mention seal 3, trumpet 2, and trumpet 6 while he's talking about the thunders. And then when he gets to the vials, he might mention seal 4, trumpet 3, and trumpet 5 while he's talking about the vials. Okay? Let me get y'all an example of what I'm talking about. So, one example we have is Revelation chapter 10. He goes and he talks about the 7 thunders. Now, this is right after he mentioned the 6th trumpet. So now he's moving on to the thunders, and he hasn't even finished the trumpets yet. And then after he talks about all the thunders, then in Revelation chapter 11, verse 15, he goes back and talks about the 7th trumpet. So another example would be Revelation chapter 7. He's talking about the sealing of the 144,000. 12,000 Jews from each of the 12 tribes are going to be sealed with the Holy Spirit. These are called the Jewish bride. Then when you switch over to chapter 14, he talks about the 144,000 again. This is the same 144,000 from chapter 7. But he mentions them after he talks about the trumpets, okay? So guys, this is what it will look like when the judgments start hitting and they last all the way to the second coming. You can see how the intensity of the judgments is getting stronger and thicker as time goes on. Now guys, if you want to know what all the symbolism means in the book of Revelation, you can go out on YouTube and do a tremendous study. There are people who actually did studies on this verse by verse, word for word. I won't take the time to go through all of that. One more thing you're going to have to note when reading the book of Revelation is that the tribulation period, this 7-year period, is divided into two halves. The first 3.5 years is referred to in Scripture as the tribulation, but the second half is referred to as the Great Tribulation. Now, don't confuse this with tribulations, okay? We have daily tribulations that we go through that the Scriptures talk about, okay? But when it talks about the tribulation, it's talking about that final 7 years. When it talks about the Great Tribulation, it's talking about the final 7 years. So when you read the book of Matthew or you read the book of John where it talks about all these martyred saints coming out of the Great Tribulation, it's talking about the second half of the 7-year period. One more thing you need to know when reading the book of Revelation is Jesus told us to pray that we would be counted worthy to escape all these things that are coming upon the earth and to stand before the Son of Man. And Jesus said that he would keep us from the hour of trial, which is coming upon the whole world to test them that do not believe, okay? That hour equals 7 years. Now, in the book of Revelation, it talks a lot about this silence in heaven for 30 minutes. That 30 minutes is referring to 3.5 years. So this is a play on words, or it has a dual application. That 30 minutes in heaven, or those 3.5 years where God goes silent, he's referring to the first rapture. After the first Gentile, not the first Gentile bride, the first rapture, when the Gentile bride is taken, then there will be silence in heaven for 3.5 years right here. In other words, there won't be another rapture again for 3.5 years when the Jews are taken, the 144,000, who are the Jewish bride. Now, this also has another meaning. That 30 minutes was referring to the Day of Atonement. Now, whenever the priest would go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement to find out what God's decision will be for the following year in terms of blessing and judgment, they would usually wait, the people standing outside would wait in silence for about 30 minutes to get God's decision. That 30 minutes of silence is a clue that Jesus is pointing to the Day of Atonement. So when he talks about the 30 minutes of silence in heaven, he's referring to the second coming of Jesus on the Day of Atonement, which I'm going to teach you more about later on. So when you get to chapters 20, 21, and 22, he's basically saying, okay, everything's completed now. We've had the tribulation period. Satan's locked up. Now we're going to go into this millennial reign of Christ for 1,000 years. We're going to have a great time. When this is over, Satan's going to be released. It's basically going to be another tribulation period, sort of kind of all over again. to test those who've never been tested. And then once that is over and all that's said and done, he tells us about the New Jerusalem and how great it's going to be and everything. That is when everything ends and we enter into eternal rest with him.